And overall, we see many of the companies through our PSPs thinking about how do they make sure that they're maximizing the offer. So this goes to the shopping cart, right? How are they ensuring that the complex is made simple for consumers? And it really has highlighted what's the consumer shopping experience like.
Welcome to the Tearsheet Podcast. I'm Zack Miller, Tearsheet's editor-in-chief. Today's guest is Steve Villegas, VP of Payment Partnerships in North America for PPRO. He works with acquirers and payment service providers to give them a single integration to offer a variety of local payment options to their customers. We explore a recent white paper PPRO published about how COVID has impacted consumer spending around the globe and disrupted payments, particularly in cross-border markets. We also discuss how the needs of various players, from merchants to consumers, have changed during this period. Steve Villegas is my guest today on the Tearsheet Podcast.
Hi, this is Steve Villegas. I am with PPRO. I am responsible for North America from a sales and partnership perspective. So in charge of all of our partnerships. PPRO traditionally is a provider of local payments across the globe. So here specifically in the US, we have a lot of large tier 1, tier 2 multinational partners that provide services to merchants around the world from a acquiring and payment service provider perspective. PPRO historically, over the years, it's a 12-year-old company based in London. That's our headquarters, and founded out of Germany. And we have built offices across the globe to support the local markets. And we connect to local payments across the world. And these are not your traditional card payments, but more so the various types of payments that those local consumers might consider to use most often. So whether it's bank transfer methods, which are really dominant in Europe, or cash methods, which you find a lot in LATAM as well as APAC, or you might see other types of methods like e-wallets, which are really predominant in Asia, specifically in China. So we enable and provide a model where we provide acquirers and PSPs access to those, and it's through one integration and one contract and one reconciliation. So basically, we take the complex world of local payments and we try to simplify it for our partners. Today, globally, we support over 150 PSPs and with over 160 methods through each of those regions. And we have offices that support those. We're about 280 employees today and growing rapidly, especially through this time that we've been in where e-commerce has really exploded.
Right. So we're hearing that from a lot of guests. E-commerce obviously has exploded. I know you guys published a white paper recently. Is it worth kind of riffing on some of the takeaways from that for our audience?
Yeah. So that was the Payments in Time of Social Distancing white paper. And it really highlighted some key things that we are seeing in the marketplace and really look at the first 6 months this year and some of the transitions. And obviously, retail shopping, as we all know, saw a really large decrease because of foot traffic and having to close and the variety of things that all of us dealt with around the world. And obviously it led to a massive shift in e-commerce. I think it goes without saying. But what we saw generally is, when you think about globally, markets varied from a growth in e-commerce where you usually would see typically 10 to 20% growth annually. And it'd move a few percentage points up in each region. Where that really fast forwarded to like 50% growth in the first 3 months of dealing with COVID-19. And you think about the U.S. historically, we've been around 12% of retail that's done through e-commerce, and that's real, and we've seen that grow to like 18%. So it's almost like we took 5 to 10 years and fast forwarded in just that short period of time, and that really deals with consumers' behaviors changing. And when retail didn't open, or when they first closed, you saw obviously the shift to many online ways of either ordering food or ordering groceries or going and picking things up in certain, whether it's shop and pick up, or you saw obviously the growth of just general e-commerce, and that really is a big piece of it. And when retail actually did open up, I think the other thing that we saw from some of the trends, takeaways, where the contactless saw sizable growth. So obviously, you think about going into stores and social distancing and everyone wearing masks and not wanting to touch things. Well, obviously, contactless has a sizable advantage there versus hitting the keypad with your debit card or credit card. And so we also saw cash used less, and even some cases retailers moved away from cash when possible. From a PPRO perspective, some of the dramatic growth that we saw in several e-com areas during the first half, some interesting trends. We saw women's clothing saw an increase of 311%. I know my wife personally, I saw the boxes show up at our door a little more often than maybe they did previously. Interesting enough, food and beverage purchases were also up 285%. And that's obviously indicative of consumers shifting their shopping to, but when they're, many times, whether the restaurants were open or not, doing more online ordering, whether it's pickup or delivery of those, but certainly a lot of e-commerce.
I bet beer and alcohol was probably big in there if it was deliverable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in those states where they can make that happen, that's absolutely, we saw that. I think that one other thing that we noticed is there was a tick up, and there's general growth, but certainly a tick up of gaming, right? Online gaming, whether that's, I think, some gambling, but also obviously, video games. We have several partners that support that segment, and certainly saw a sizable growth there, especially right after, I guess you could say, where schools went online or shut down for the summer. There was a huge growth in that segment as well.
And what about the PSPs? How have they reacted to COVID?
Yeah, that's been interesting. Well, first of all, I think for most of us and our partners, I think the majority of people are now still work from home here in the U.S. And in those partners, and I think that's from an adjustment from a people side, right? So it definitely packs your day, and you're talking to a lot more now from an actual business perspective. And what they're seeing certainly a shift in a greater focus in e-commerce, where obviously many of the PSPs or acquirers that were very retail focused have had to come up with a strategy around helping their merchants make that shift, whether they were moving to online for the first time or growing their online scope and trying to find the right partners. And overall, we see many of the companies through our PSPs thinking about how do they make sure that they're maximizing the offers. So this goes to the shopping cart, right? How are they ensuring that the complex is made simple for consumers? And it really has highlighted what's the consumer shopping experience like. And I think we all know the Amazon touch on things and how Amazon has made it very simple to shop. And I think most retailers want to be able to provide a similar service so they can compete, whether it's a retail good or service that they're providing. And I think our partners are trying to help them help their merchants modify to that, whether that's involving other partners or whether it's improving the experience, or for where we fall in, it's really ensuring that they have the right payment mix, that they're providing the right payment options. And what we see globally, and really from a U.S. perspective, you're talking about cross-border, and many of our other regions, you're talking about local. You want to make sure you're offering the right payment options, and it's not just about card. In fact, if you look at some of the stats that we have globally, around 77% of the e-commerce purchases this year will be made in some other form besides a credit card, meaning it could be a bank transfer method, or as I mentioned, e-wallet, or maybe it's a pay later, or it could be a cash-based method even, where you have a consumer making a purchase, making a purchase online, but then having to go to a convenience store to pay for that purchase, an e-commerce purchase through a barcode. So a lot of transitions like that, and PSPs are having to make those adjustments and ensuring that they're educating and working with their merchants in the way that helps them expand their business and their footprint to continue to be profitable.
That makes a lot of sense. What are you seeing, Steve, from a cross-border point of view? How has COVID impacted those types of volumes? I don't know if you have that data.
Yeah, so it's continued to grow. And you think about the U.S. itself, somewhere around 5% in the past of our e-commerce transactions have been cross-border. And you think about the U.S., of course, very consumer-centric within the borders of the U.S., some cross-border, but we see growth there. I think we've seen that significantly grow over the course of the last quarter. And that's really where you have more consumers having more time, maybe at home, like many of us are, doing more shopping, doing more investigating online, and finding other places they can shop besides just here within the U.S. And finding out, and the same goes across the globe, right? And I think what we've really seen is some of those, and you think about Europe and what's happened cross-border there, and they're mostly cross-border because there's so many countries where you've seen some interesting shifts in what's happened with some of the consumer shopping. Example, we saw a huge growth, which is kind of interesting. Polish shoppers buying goods and services out of Luxembourg. So I'm not sure if it was just they found certain supplies or certain goods and services in Luxembourg, and I haven't identified the exact products. I think certainly there's a lot of products they offer, but they're really exploited the especially younger shoppers using one of the newest mobile methods in Poland called Blick. And so the luxury goods in Luxembourg or other products and services offering Blick through a cross-border method, they were able to pick up sales. And we also saw things like shoppers in the Netherlands buying lots of products out of Ireland and out of Cyprus. And in the Netherlands, they have to use Ideal. That's a bank transfer method that connects to all the banks. And that's what their preference is. Over 60% of the consumers there use that method when they're shopping online. So we saw interesting shifts like that. And you also saw, of course, country to country shopping really extended into China, Brazil, and Mexico. We saw a lot of shopping out of those countries as well. So it's been an interesting time. Certainly, some of the trends that we were already seeing just got exacerbated and grew very quickly during this time.
What about in terms of numbers of options of local payments? Are we in expansion mode still? Are you seeing, from your perspective, more and more options, or are we more contracting? Like, where are we in that cycle?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think we're seeing some new methods to come on what it really is it's methods where countries that historically were maybe very heavy cash or maybe more non-banked, or you've seen them have a traditional method and they've moved to a more of a mobile method. So, for example, I mentioned Blick in Poland. That's a method that's been around for just a few years now, but it now has been one of the fastest growing methods in Europe because of the mobile enablement that it has and the one-click shopping capability and things like reoccurring. So you're seeing some new technologies that are coming about in various markets that may help to leapfrog older technologies that would have served maybe the previous generations. And so I think you're seeing shifts like that take place. So I would say that's where the expansion is. But you also see consolidation happening in some of the payment methods where methods may come and form a joint force in order to solve other market problems collectively. So it's an interesting time. I think as technology continues to advance, you'll see, and as consumers around the world continue to have more mobile enablement, their smartphones become better at processing, better at security and enablement there for the consumer portion of the processing. You'll see advancement of other payment methods as well. Certainly, you think about China and the e-wallets, Alipay and WeChat Pay. Those, of course, have been significant for the last few years, but they've even taken on a greater amount of significance during the course of the last several months. Now, notwithstanding what's happening with the government here in putting a stop on WeChat specifically. Yeah. So it's but certainly globally they still see a large advancement.
So at least on the U.S. side, are there if a young startup comes to you and has an idea for a new payment method, like are there niche opportunities that are still kind of ripe to take advantage of?
There are in certain markets for sure. And I think if somebody can continue to figure out how to build the bridge around the banking technologies, right? And I think some of this goes back to even thinking about Europe and what's happening with PSD2 and open banking, and the opportunity to collectively work with the banks as open banking takes place and to provide technologies that allow the banks to continue to keep their piece of the pie, but enable new technologies. That's where I think we'll see more of the startups find that niche. And you also still have emerging markets like India, which obviously RuPay and Paytm and others are starting to really dominate, or they're dominating that market, and they're starting to expand into more cross-border opportunities. We're working with them right now, as well as with the banks. And then you think about Africa. M-Pesa has really established a lot through several countries there, but there's other methods that are going to continue to grow, and those are niche markets. And I think over time you'll see both new technologies as well as stability in those certain markets, banking systems that may play into a part of what the next set of payment types might look like.
Interesting. Are there payment? This is kind of a weird question. Are there payment methods in the U.S. that fascinate you?
That is a good question. I think what we're seeing is the probably the rise of some of the afterpays, and that's what I think fascinates me from a understanding the consumer adoption for some of the pay laters or the Klarna types of payments that are traditionally have been more credit card related, right? When people would wanted to buy something, use credit cards or put it on a credit card and collect interest. In this way, it's a little bit different dynamic, and so you're seeing a shift in consumer behaviors. So I'm interested to just see what's the evolution of that. What's that going to look like? Will that turn into another consumer line of credit, or is it going to stick with the traditional pay later, where you're able to slice up your purchase into several payments, or one or two payments, and what the evolution of that will look like? And is it going to take on other form factors? Are banks going to start to look at that as an option versus the traditional types of cards where you're paying an exorbitant amount of interest in some cases, right? Where maybe previous generations have really seen that as the way for purchases, and this new pay later type of purchase becomes the better way to do it because it's less costly and it helps consumers budget. And what are our banks, our traditional banks and the issuing banks going to look at that as a more of an option? So it'll be interesting to see what that happens in that space. I also think there's going to be further enablement of things like how is PayPal, they saw significant growth in this last quarter, and how are some of their products going to help the ecosystem, whether it's the e-commerce ecosystem or the traditional retail ecosystem, be more efficient in how they're doing business.
Can you be more specific about what those products are that you envision being more influential?
Yeah, so I think some of the think about some of the bank transfer products or the real-time bank or person P2P products that are traditional P2P. Will we see those turn into more B2C or consumer to business purchases? Will some of those products be better enabled so it becomes more of a real-time ACH or a real-time bank transfer, much like we see with some of the banks in Europe? Today traditionally, anytime even a debit card purchase is made, there's a traditional timeline that takes place, and when how long the funds are actually held when they're actually deposited at retailer, which it could take a day to two to get to that retailer. And the new P2P platforms that allow transfer to happen oftentimes are very much real time. And so I think you're going to see, and in real time payments obviously is a buzz in the industry. How are some of the more technical enabled players like a PayPal and others, how are they going to look at these technologies that may become more disruptive in the future to some of the banking systems that exist today? So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in that part of the industry as well.
I appreciate that. That was very insightful. In the remaining time we have, I'm curious to know what you and your team stateside are focused on, I guess, to the end of 2020. We're almost there. Thank goodness. And looking out at 2021, what are your big priorities? What are you guys focused on?
Yeah, right now it's just prepping for the holiday season. We have a lot of new partners that are getting ready to integrate and go live, as well as we have a lot of existing partners that are continuing to grow and expand. And part of that growth and expansion is prepping for the holiday season, ensuring all the big retailers that do e-commerce and the ones that we support through our PSP partners, that we are ready and ensure that we support the growth and anything that need to be enabled, right? And there's several payment methods that have come aboard in the last couple of years that we're seeing growth in, and ensuring that the stability and the growth is supported there. So that's I would say number one. Number two is really planning for the future, planning for next year, understanding that the growth of e-commerce continues to accelerate. We continue to expand our roadmap from payment options, and looking at new markets, where we can expand. Traditionally, we do mostly cross-border. We continue to invest in new markets where we can do local collection and local settlement. And we think that we'll see a greater expansion and need there as companies continue to look at their expansion plans and look at providers and their partners on how they can support that. And then it's continue to grow the team, right, from an account support standpoint as we add more new partners here in the U.S. and then multinational partners that we support that are across the globe, ensuring we have the right people on board to help with that expansion. And really, I think what I'm looking forward to is, as soon as we get back to being able to go and meet with our partners, the last 6 months have been, all Zoom meetings or what have you, whatever, pick your video format. And that's what it's been. So looking forward to getting back out there and meeting with partners, either at conferences or on-site in QBRs and various other modes that we have of meeting with them to have that time and to spend and ensure that we're on the same page and looking forward to an even brighter future.
Steve, great talking to you. Thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet Podcast today.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate the time.